Picture this, we're in the final act, the final war, the final arc of One Piece, and everybody's going up against the world government, and you got Pluton, this absolute unit of a battleship, possibly maybe even just an island that's been made into a battleship. You know, Thriller Bark exists, Pluton could just be a bigger version of it. You got a bunch of cannons firing off, maybe it's launching literally like nukes at the world government people or somebody else, but it's being utilized to just terrorize the world right now. Meanwhile, you got Shirahoshi, who finally decided to stop crying, and she is over there just commanding an army of Sea Kings, who, by the way, are 5,000 meters long. Oda might walk that one back because that's literally a 5K and halfway to Fishman Island, but nevertheless, Sea Kings, monstrous beings, and Shirahoshi's out there like George Washington, just an absolute, like George Washington crossing the Delaware. Here's Shirahoshi leading her army of Sea Kings ready to take on the world government, and then out in the distance, you just hear, no, that's not what a dragon sounds like. How does a dragon sound like? Just imagine dragon noises start happening, and then this sea of fire just get rained down upon the battlefield. And leading the charge on this one particular gigantic dragon is Daenerys Targaryen. Now, obviously, that's just crazy headcanon. Not gonna happen. The Game of Thrones crossover with One Piece, the series is over to a dismal end, might I add. But I do want to talk about the possibility, a One Piece theory, on ancient weapon Uranus possibly being someone who could control dragons. Now, the ancient weapon Uranus is an interesting one because we literally know nothing about it. We only got introduced to it when Robin was talking to King Neptune about ancient weapons and Uranus being one of them. So that's literally all we know, is Uranus is one of the ancient weapons. However, just because we don't know anything doesn't mean we can't theorize. So let's break it down what we already know. Uranus being an ancient weapon means it's one of the 3 most powerful weapons that could turn the world upside down. It could decimate the world essentially. And ancient weapons can also be an actual, just an object that's a weapon, or an actual person. So we have Pluton, a battleship, or Shirahoshi, someone who could command Sea Kings. Another interesting to note about ancient weapons is that they're named after Greek gods. So Pluton named after Pluto, the god of the underworld. You got Shirahoshi, Poseidon, named after Poseidon, the god of the sea. And Uranus is named after the Greek god Uranus, who was actually the god of the sky. So this is actually important because it gives us a little insight. So if we look at, say, Pluton, that's actually a weird one because I don't really know how a battleship could connect to the underworld in a way. Maybe it's the type of ammunition it's using, or maybe, like I said, it's talking about like Earth as a whole, and this battleship is literally like an island, right? So it's gonna make sense that way. Poseidon and Shirahoshi makes the most sense. Shirahoshi is literally the mermaid princess and commanding all these sea kings, right? So she's like the sea god commanding all these sea kings. What's a king to a god? And now Uranus is the god of the sky. Now this has created a lot of different theories by people, and some of them are pretty good. I'll mention them a little later on the video. But my theory is something to do with dragons. Now you might have seen me mention this in my Vegapunk theory with Kaido and him getting experimented on, where I talked about Vegapunk's connection to dragons, and I had this realization while I was thinking about that video and brainstorming it out, like, what is an equal power to Sea Kings in the sky? And that, my thinking there, is dragons. And think about if somebody was able to like control a force that strong, that to me is an ancient weapon. Now dragons are interesting because we've seen many different versions of them in the One Piece world, but the ones we've seen so far haven't really been real. Of course, you have the dragon devil fruits, Momonosuke's artificial one, which really is quite useless. But then you have Kaido, who might be an actual dragon or is using a dragon devil fruit, but that version is extremely strong. And then finally, the 2 dragons we saw in Punk Hazard, which were artificially created by Vegapunk. Now Vegapunk there was experimenting with recreating dragons. He made like 13 different versions, I believe, and only 2 of them worked. So one of the small one, the small green dragon that worked, is really just this little goofy dragon that couldn't do any damage. But dragon number 13, that thing, while not like super terrifyingly strong, Zoro handled it with pretty much, very low diff. He didn't have any issues, but it was a pretty big dragon, right? If it attacked like a random village, it could do some damage. So if that dragon was still a failure, how strong are actual dragons? And actually, we do have one example of a real dragon within the One Piece world. And this is actually related to a story we've heard over and over and over again, and it's regarding Ryuma. Now, Ryuma, of course, is absolute legend in Wano. The sword god protected the country from outside invaders. Perhaps he was once the world's strongest swordsman, but the legend that people always talk about is him slaying a dragon. Now, say if he was once the world's strongest swordsman, say he's the strength of someone like Mihawk, and Mihawk someone who's compared to Shanks, right? So like people like Shanks and Mihawk, you're talking about like stories you would tell about them. If it was something that gets repeated to showcase their strength, you would think dragons are pretty strong because how much that story is mentioned. If dragons weren't that strong, why would they keep mentioning that story? Is it just like a fantasy element of like, oh, he killed a dragon, but if dragons weren't really that strong, it's not that big of a deal. There's plenty of other stories you could definitely tell about Ryuma. Now, we do see this dragon, Ryuma's one-shot story Monsters, but I'm not really gonna take the design as canon because it's pretty like, it's a side story. It's not really part of the main One Piece story. So like the design, the dragon doesn't really look that terrifying. It's not that detailed. I do want to take the story as canon, and one of the things about that story is how that dragon became a weapon is the person that was going up against Ryuma. I believe his name was Cyrano or something like that. But he found a dragon horn which he could blow and control the dragon. Now you could use this help my theory in multiple ways. One of which is like you're saying, oh, there is a way to control dragons. So maybe the ancient weapon Uranus isn't like a person, but like a horn that could control all the dragons at once, like a whole army of them, like all of them together, and like even the stronger dragons and all that. Or you could take it in a way where like that dragon that Ryuma killed, which spread to be a huge legend, wasn't really that strong to the point because he got controlled by a dragon horn. So maybe there's even stronger dragons, way stronger, that a dragon horn would have no effect against. So this is really just setting up the dragons to be a terrifying force that could decimate the world, and obviously something or someone that can control this force would make them an ancient weapon. Now once you start asking what this object could be or who this dragon king or queen might be, if it's not Daenerys Targaryen, it gets a little iffy to me because it's pretty much unknown, which is why this is not like a super complete theory. It's a little headcanon-ish. I do think this idea is very interesting, and the possibility of it happening is not like completely unrealistic, right? So one thing people might bring up is like, if dragons are this terrifying force, how come we haven't seen any of them, or how come they haven't really been brought up in the story? Now to that, I just say, Oda, like the One Piece world is so big. There's so much that we haven't seen. There's literally like many moons out there that we haven't seen. So maybe, especially Sky Island, that world up there, we don't really know much of that world at all. So maybe like other Sky Islands are holding dragons, and dragons like rule over this mountain in Sky Island. And if you want to go even higher into the many moons that the One Piece world has, maybe they're up there, right? They're just chilling up there, and they could definitely get introduced to the story later, along with possibly the Dragon King or a Queen. And a lot of people like to speculate Uranus being something we've already seen or someone we've already seen because there's so much to the One Piece world already. But Oda, as we've seen, this man likes to introduce new things. Each chapter, each new arc, each new saga, he brings in so many different people. He loves creating new characters and fantasy elements, and dragons are such a major fantasy element. The fact that we haven't seen them like in the forefront of the story that much doesn't really make sense to me. Like we got like giants and sea kings and all these like different elements that Oda likes to explore, like Thriller Bark, all this horror elements and all that. So dragons not really being prominent in this world doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's why I think they'll get introduced later on, and them having a connection to an ancient weapon would make sense to me as well. Now, the power of dragons, there's many ways we could go to this. You could either have like they're strong, but they're not like terrifyingly strong, but there's a lot of them, right? So if you can have one person or one item that can control all of them the same way Shirahoshi would do to Sea Kings, now you essentially have the sea monsters and their sky equivalent. So that's like the comparison there. Or if you don't think it makes sense for this like whole world of dragons to be all of a sudden introduced later when there hasn't been much mention of them at all yet in the story, you could have it like there's only like 5 to 10 of them, but they're just absolute monsters, right? They're just incredibly strong. And maybe the dragon king or queen is actually just one dragon. It's not an actual person, right? It's a dragon king that commands this group of dragons. And maybe they were like terrorized earlier on by the world government too, right? Like, because we've seen the world government just wants to use everybody. Celestial dragons, that's the other thing, right? Dragon, not like Luffy's father, but like the idea of dragons has been implemented into like thematically into the One Piece world a lot with the celestial dragons and like this icon of power. So I think like as we get more into Endgame, dragons as a story element and as a fantasy element within the world will definitely become more and more prominent. But yeah, that's pretty much my thought process and theory on it. I know it's probably very short. There's not a lot backing it, but it's an idea that I think is very interesting. And it was such a like epiphany for me, like when I was making the Kaido and Vegapunk video of like, like dragons, like there could be as strong as Sea Kings, and like you can't really control Sea Kings, but wait, Shirahoshi can't. So what if somebody could control dragons like in the sky and now you have Uranus, right? So that could be an idea. Now I want to get into some other theories on Uranus because, this is pretty not a lot of basis to it, but these other theories are very good and very possible as well. One popular one is Momonosuke being Uranus because of his ability to talk to Zunisha. Now, Zunisha, obviously like a land animal, it's an elephant, but the sheer size of it, how tall it is, and how it like essentially reaches the skies, right? So like that element of like it being like a sky animal in a way because it's so tall, and Momonosuke being able to control it, that gives him access to a terrifying weapon. Now, is Zunisha on the same level of like a bunch of Sea Kings? I don't know about that. Here's the thing. The only ancient weapon we know so far is Shirahoshi. And her power is so OP. Like Sea Kings, 5,000 meters. Like that's crazy, right? So like even Pluton, this battleship that they've been talking about, and like when I talked about like it literally launching nukes, I was kind of joking. But like Sea Kings, like if you're just firing cannonballs, even if it's like thousands upon thousands, but if you got thousands upon thousands of Sea Kings, now you're talking like tens of thousands of meters worth of just monsters, a whole army of Sea Kings. One battleship, is that really gonna stack up to that, right? So that's why like for Pluton, maybe I'll make another video on Pluton, but like it being an actual big island that's turned into a battleship would make sense, and it having the ability to like launch literally like nukes, right? That's how you like destroy islands and decimate the world. So you essentially have an entire island that's just been completely militarized, and then it's also movable. It's also able to cross the seas, and that in a way could stack up to Poseidon, I think, if it was really like that. But Uranus would really have to stack up in the same way. And Zunisha, while it's super strong, you saw what it was able to do to Jack, but at the same time, it didn't kill Jack, right? And like Jack and everybody else was starting to like do a little damage back to Zunisha, right? So like if you think like maybe like 3, 4, 5 Sea Kings would probably take Zunisha down. Like how strong can Zunisha actually be? And its only attack, as far as I know, is just this big ass trunk, right? So you can only swing that trunk for so long before people start cutting down your legs and you're pretty much donezo. So Momonosuke being an ancient weapon, interesting, but at the same time I feel like that would be explored a little more already, since we've known Momo for so long. Maybe at the end of Wano, possibly. So while I do understand where that theory is coming from, I don't think it's that likely. Another popular theory is Enel coming back with Uranus. Somehow he found it on the moon somehow. Now for anime only people, I of course was one of them. Enel actually had his own cover story after Skypiea, so he ended up going to the moon and finding out like history of there, how like Skypeans and like sky people like immigrated from the moon, and he found out like his hometown was actually like people that immigrated to the moon. And last we saw him, he had like founded an empire on the moon with like a bunch of robots and stuff. So while some people think like that's the end of Enel's story, you know, it was kind of wrapped up in that cover story, he's also a very good character, I think, a very strong character. It's just unfortunate that he met Luffy, a person completely immune to his powers, right? So like him being brought back into the story and introducing more elements from the moon and the sky and like the Sky Islands would make sense. But at the same time, him finding like an ancient weapon that's just up there doesn't make a lot of sense. You would think the world government would have tried to do something. They have Vegapunk, one of the smartest people. I'm sure he knows how to make rockets that go into space, right? They would have explored there to like go to the moons and try to find if the ancient weapon was up there, I think. So I like the idea of Enel returning to the story, but him returning with an ancient weapon doesn't make too much sense to me. Now the final one that I've seen is pretty interesting, and that is that ancient weapon Uranus is a devil fruit, and specifically Dragon's devil fruit. And it kind of ties back to my dragon. It's not like an actual dragon, but dragon has it, right? But the devil fruit essentially is like air, wind, weather manipulation, because, you know, Uranus, the sky god, he's able to manipulate like air and air pressure and like wind and the weather. And we seen Dragon do that when he saved Luffy. And there's like theories that maybe Dragon was on Roger's crew, and that's how they were saved from the Ed War against Shiki, right? So like weather altering like battles a lot has been you know, a reappearing theme within One Piece. So Uranus being this devil fruit, and then Dragon of course is also like the world's most wanted man, and he's going up against the world government, so that could add up in a way. So this theory, I actually really think it's a very good theory, and it's very possible, but at the same time I want to see some new like dragons get introduced. Like actual dragon from the story is cool and all, but I also want to see some real dragons, and like Daenerys Targaryen-esque type of person commanding them would be badass as well. But what do you guys think of this theory? Do you have any theories of your own on what the ancient weapon Uranus could possibly be? And how do you think like the ancient weapons are going to play a role later in the story overall? Let me know in the comments below. But as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please hit that like button. It helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And as always, you want to keep up to date with when I'm posting videos and when I'm going live and doing live streams, which I will probably be doing one on Friday. What time? You're gonna have to subscribe to find out, but it's gonna be talking about the new One Piece chapter probably. How much I talk about it will be depending how good the chapter is, and then I'm gonna be doing a full review on Return to the Reverie by Artor from the Library of Ohara. It's just an absolute masterpiece, and there's so many theories that come from that as well, so I want to do a full stream on it, so keep an eye out for that. We're now, as of this video, I believe 232 subscribers, so thank you guys for the support. Let's keep it rolling. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell to join the squad as well. Follow me on Twitter, I'm DKing4, and catch you guys next time. Peace.